The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty ranch in Oakridge Valley, Montana. Inside the weathered farmhouse, Elizabeth Morgan stood at the kitchen sink, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other clutching her late husband's dog tags so tightly the metal edges cut into her palm. 42 days. That's how long she'd been a widow, and in just under 3 months she would become a mother to a child who would never know their father. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The letter from the bank sat unopened on the counter. She didn't need to read it to know what it said. The mortgage payments were 3 months behind, and without Thomas, the ranch was slipping through her fingers like the fine Montana soil in a drought. She gazed out the window at the sprawling property that had been in her husband's family for generations. The Morgan cattle ranch had once been the pride of the valley, but the harsh winter and Thomas's unexpected death had left both the land and Elizabeth's heart barren and cold. The sound of tires on gravel pulled her from her thoughts. Elizabeth quickly wiped away her tears and straightened her shoulders. The Morgan women didn't break. That's what her mother-in-law had always said before she passed. But Lord, how she was testing that theory now. Through the window, she watched as a beat-up pickup truck came to a stop in front of the house. A tall figure emerged, the setting sun silhouetting broad shoulders and a cowboy hat. For one heart-stopping moment, her mind played a cruel trick. Thomas? But no. Thomas was buried on the hill overlooking the east pasture, where wildflowers would bloom come spring. The knock on the door was firm, confident. Elizabeth straightened her hair, smoothed her dress over her growing belly, and opened the door. "Mrs. Morgan?" The man stood with his hat in his hands, respectful. His voice was deep, with a slight drawl that marked him as not quite local. "I'm Jackson Hayes." Elizabeth nodded, recognition dawning. "You're old man Hayes's nephew from Wyoming." "Yes, ma'am." His eyes, a startling shade of green against his sun-weathered skin, flickered briefly to her belly before returning to her face. "I heard about Thomas. I'm real sorry for your loss." Elizabeth's throat tightened. "Thank you," she managed. "What can I do for you, Mr. Hayes?" Jackson shifted his weight, his worn boots scuffing the porch boards. "It's more what I can do for you, ma'am. Your husband and my uncle had an arrangement. I've come to honor it." Elizabeth frowned, confusion creasing her brow. "What arrangement?" "May I come in?" It's a bit of a story. 20 minutes later, Elizabeth sat at her kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee between her hands, staring at the man across from her in disbelief. "Let me see if I understand," she said slowly. "My husband hired you through your uncle to come work the ranch for the calving season?" Jackson nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Thomas contacted Uncle Frank about 3 months ago, said he needed experienced help for the spring. I was between jobs, so Uncle Frank recommended me. Thomas and I spoke on the phone a few times. I was supposed to arrive next week, but when we got word about—" He paused, clearly searching for the right words. "About what happened, I figured I should come early." Elizabeth's mind reeled. Thomas had never mentioned hiring help. But then, there were many things they hadn't discussed in those final weeks before the accident. The financial troubles. The baby. The future that now seemed as fragile as morning frost. "Mr. Hayes, I appreciate your dedication, but I'm afraid I can't afford to pay you. The ranch is—" Her voice faltered. "In trouble," he finished for her. "I know. Thomas told me about the loan issues." Elizabeth stiffened. The proud part of her, the part that had been raised to never show weakness, bristled at the idea that this stranger knew their private struggles. "Then you understand why I can't hire you," she said, more sharply than she intended. Jackson leaned forward, his gaze direct and unwavering. "Mrs. Morgan, I'm not looking to be hired. I'm looking to fulfill a promise. Your husband paid me half up front. The other half is due when the calving's done and the herd's back to strength. That money's already mine. I intend to earn it." Elizabeth shook her head. You don't understand. There might not be a ranch come spring. The bank can wait, Jackson interrupted. With respect, ma'am, what this ranch needs is someone to work it. The land's good. The bloodlines in your herd are strong. With the right management, you can turn this around. He paused, his eyes once again flickering to her belly. And, from where I'm sitting, you could use the help. The bluntness of his assessment stung, but Elizabeth couldn't deny the truth in it. She was 5 months pregnant, alone, and drowning in debt. The pride that had sustained her these past weeks suddenly felt hollow in the face of reality. One season, Jackson continued when she remained silent. Let me work the spring calving. If by summer you want me gone, I'll go. No questions asked. Elizabeth studied him. Jackson Hayes was a stranger, but there was something in his steady gaze that reminded her of Thomas. A certainty, a groundedness that had been her anchor in a chaotic world. Now that anchor was gone, and she was adrift. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The bunkhouse is cold, she said finally. The heater broke last winter. A smile tugged at the corner of Jackson's mouth. I've slept in worse, Mrs. Morgan. Elizabeth, she corrected automatically. If you're going to be working here, you might as well use my name. Jackson nodded. Elizabeth, he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. You can call me Jack. That night, after Jack had taken his bags to the bunkhouse and disappeared into the gathering darkness, Elizabeth sat alone in the kitchen, the untouched letter from the bank still on the counter. She placed her hand on her stomach, feeling the slight flutter of movement within. What do you think, little one? She whispered. Can we trust him? There was no answer, of course, just the quiet creaking of the old house and the distant howl of a coyote. For the first time in 42 days, Elizabeth fell asleep without crying. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of crispness that promised a hard day's work. Elizabeth woke to the smell of coffee, real coffee, not the weak substitute she'd been rationing, and the sound of boots on the porch. She dressed quickly, wincing at how her clothes strained against her changing body, and made her way to the kitchen. Through the window, she could see Jack already at work, moving with purpose toward the barn. The coffee pot on the stove was full, and beside it sat a paper bag from Miller's bakery in town. Inside, she found fresh pastries still warm from the oven. By the time she reached the barn, Jack had already fed the horses and was checking the equipment with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Morning, he said without looking up from the tractor engine he was examining. Hope you don't mind me getting an early start. Not at all, Elizabeth replied, clutching her coffee mug for warmth. Thank you for the breakfast. Jack straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. Figured you could use a good meal. Growing a person's hard work. The casual reference to her pregnancy, spoken without pity or awkwardness, was oddly refreshing. Since Thomas's death, people in town had treated her like she was made of glass, their sympathetic glances and whispered conversations following her wherever she went. What's the plan for today? She asked, determined to be useful despite her condition. Jack glanced at her, his expression unreadable. You any good with numbers? Elizabeth nodded. I kept the books for the ranch since we married. Thomas was brilliant with the animals, but hopeless with paperwork. Something like approval flashed across Jack's face. Then that's where we start. I need to know exactly what we're working with. Herd numbers, feed supplies, equipment status, finances. Every detail. We? The word slipped out before she could stop it. Jack's gaze was steady. This is your ranch, Elizabeth. I'm just here to help. Every decision is yours. The simplicity of his statement, the absence of condescension or doubt, struck a chord within her. Since Thomas's death, well-meaning neighbors and friends had tried to take over, to make decisions for her, as if grief had rendered her incapable. All right, she agreed. Give me an hour to get the books together. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Mornings began with coffee. Jack seemed to have an endless supply. and a brief meeting where Elizabeth would share the tasks that needed attention. Jack would work the ranch during the day, fixing fences, checking on the pregnant heifers, repairing equipment that had been neglected during Thomas's final illness, while Elizabeth tackled the administrative nightmare that the ranch's finances had become. In the evenings, they would reconvene at the kitchen table, sharing a simple meal and discussing the day's progress. Jack was a man of few words, but when he spoke, it was with a clarity and purpose that Elizabeth found comforting. There was no need to fill the silences between them. They existed comfortably, each focused on the task of saving the ranch. A week into this arrangement, Elizabeth found herself actually looking forward to their evening meetings. Jack never mentioned her growing belly or the bags under her eyes, never treated her like she was fragile or broken. He simply expected her to do her part, as he did his. It was during one of these meetings, as a late winter storm howled outside, that Jack finally broached the subject they'd been dancing around. "The bank called today," he said, his voice carefully neutral. Elizabeth tensed. "What did they say?" "That they're sending someone out next week to assess the property." Jack's fingers made quotation marks in the air. "Sounds like they're planning to foreclose." Elizabeth closed her eyes, a wave of defeat washing over her. Despite their efforts, the financial hole was too deep. Thomas had taken out a second mortgage to cover his medical bills, a fact she'd only discovered after his death. The amount was staggering. "I knew it was coming," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I just hoped we'd have more time." Jack was silent for a long moment, his fingers tapping thoughtfully on the table. "There might be a way," he said finally. Elizabeth looked up, not daring to hope. "What way?" "The spring auction in Billings," Jack explained. "It's in 3 weeks. If we can get some of your heifers ready, showcase that bloodline your husband was so proud of, we might fetch enough to at least make the back payments and buy some time." Elizabeth shook her head. "Jack, we'd need to sell half the herd to cover what we owe." "Not if we get premium prices," he countered. "And not if we can convince the bank that the ranch will be profitable again soon." "How do we do that?" Jack's expression was determined. "We show them what they're about to lose." Thomas didn't just build a cattle ranch, he created a legacy. These aren't just any cows. They're Morgan bloodlines, bred for this specific land, this specific climate. Any rancher worth his salt would pay top dollar for that genetics. His conviction was infectious, and for the first time in months, Elizabeth felt a flicker of hope. "Do you really think it could work?" Jack reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers for just a moment. "I know it can, but it's going to take everything we've got." The next morning, Elizabeth woke to find Jack already in the barn, working with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Over the next few days, he seemed to be everywhere at once, fixing, cleaning, organizing, preparing for the inspection that would determine their future. Elizabeth found herself matching his energy, ignoring the fatigue that came with her pregnancy. She updated the breeding records, organized the financial statements to show the ranch's potential rather than its current struggles, and even reached out to some of Thomas's old contacts in the industry to drum up interest in the upcoming auction. The day the bank representative arrived, the ranch was transformed. The driveway had been freshly graveled, the fences mended, the barn painted. Even the cattle seemed to understand the importance of the occasion, standing proud and healthy in the pastures. Mr. Coleman from First Montana Bank was a thin man with perpetually pursed lips and a clipboard he clutched like a shield. "Mrs. Morgan," he greeted her with perfunctory politeness. "I see you've made some improvements since my last visit." "We've been working hard," Elizabeth replied, emphasizing the we. "This is Jack Hayes, our ranch manager." Jack stepped forward, his handshake firm. "Mr. Coleman, we appreciate you taking the time to visit personally." Coleman's eyes narrowed slightly. "Ranch manager? I wasn't aware the Morgan Ranch could afford staff these days." "Investment in the future," Jack replied smoothly. "Would you like to see what we've been doing?" For the next 2 hours, Jack led Coleman around the property, his knowledge of ranching evident in every explanation, every projection, every detail. Elizabeth watched in amazement as the banker's skepticism gradually gave way to reluctant interest. "And these heifers?" Coleman asked, pointing to a group of pregnant cattle in the north pasture. "They're going to auction?" Jack nodded. "A select few. The bloodlines are exceptional. Morgan cattle are known for easy calving and rapid weight gain in this climate. We've already had inquiries from 3 major buyers. Coleman made a note on his clipboard. And the proceeds will cover the back payments and give us operating capital through the summer, Elizabeth interjected. By then, the rest of the calves will be ready for market. Coleman studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Morgan, may I speak with you privately? Jack caught her eye, a silent question. Elizabeth nodded slightly, and he excused himself, heading back toward the barn. Once he was out of earshot, Coleman's professional demeanor slipped. Elizabeth, he said, his voice softer. I knew your husband. Thomas was a good man, but he wasn't always practical when it came to business. Elizabeth stiffened. What are you implying, Mr. Coleman? Simply that grief can cloud judgment. This Hayes fellow, where did he come from? What do you really know about him? The bank is concerned that you might be being taken advantage of in your vulnerable state. The condescension in his tone ignited something in Elizabeth, a spark of the fire that had been smothered beneath grief and fear. Mr. Coleman, she said, her voice low and controlled, my vulnerable state doesn't affect my ability to run this ranch. Jack Hayes is here because I hired him, and he's proven his worth 10 times over. Now, are you here to assess the viability of this property, or to question my mental competence? Coleman had the grace to look abashed. Of course, the property, it's just nothing, Elizabeth interrupted. You have my financial projections. You've seen the improvements. Either you believe in what we're doing here, or you don't. But make no mistake, Mr. Coleman, this ranch will succeed, with or without your bank's cooperation. The banker cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with her sudden backbone. Well then, I think I have everything I need. The bank will be in touch regarding your extension request. As Coleman's car disappeared down the driveway, Elizabeth felt a presence behind her. She turned to find Jack standing there, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. Did you just threaten to take your business elsewhere? He asked, amusement evident in his voice. Elizabeth laughed, the sound surprising her. When was the last time she had laughed? I might have, though I'm not sure how much business a bankrupt widow is worth these days. Jack's expression sobered. You're worth a hell of a lot more than that bank realizes, Elizabeth Morgan. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard, and she felt a flush rise to her cheeks. To cover her confusion, she turned back toward the house. Well, let's hope they see it that way. We've got 3 weeks until the auction, and a lot of work to do before then. That night, as she lay in bed, Elizabeth realized something had shifted. For the first time since Thomas's death, she had thought about the future, not with dread, but with determination. The ranch might fail, the bank might take everything, but she would not go down without a fight. Her hand rested on her growing belly, feeling the now familiar flutter of movement. We're going to be okay, she whispered, and for the first time, she almost believed it. The days leading up to the auction passed in a blur of activity. Jack worked from dawn until well past dusk, preparing the selected heifers, ensuring they looked their best for potential buyers. Elizabeth focused on the administrative side, creating detailed genetic profiles for each animal, documenting the impressive weight gain statistics that had been the Morgan Ranch's hallmark. One evening, a week before the auction, Elizabeth found Jack sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the sunset. She lowered herself carefully beside him, her growing belly making the movement awkward. "Penny, for your thoughts?" she asked, handing him a mug of coffee. Jack accepted it with a nod of thanks. Just thinking about Thomas. The mention of her husband's name no longer brought the sharp pain it once had. Instead, there was a quiet ache, a bittersweet memory. What about him? He loved this place, Jack said simply. When we talked on the phone, he never stopped talking about the land, the cattle, the legacy he was building. He paused, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. And you! He talked about you a lot. Elizabeth swallowed past the sudden tightness in her throat. We were having problems near the end. The financial strain, his illness. It wasn't easy, Jack nodded. He mentioned that too. Said he'd made mistakes, taken risks he shouldn't have. But he was trying to fix it, Elizabeth. That's why he reached out to my uncle. He wanted to make sure you and the baby would be taken care of. Elizabeth blinked back tears. He never told me any of this. Men aren't always good at saying what matters, Jack replied. Sometimes we think showing is enough. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Elizabeth found herself studying Jack's profile, the strong jaw, the lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. He was a handsome man, in a rugged, unpolished way. The realization made her look away quickly, a confusing mix of guilt and something else stirring within her. "Thank you," she said finally, "for being here, for helping save this place." Jack turned to her, his expression serious. "Don't thank me yet. We still have to get through the auction." But there was something in his eyes, a warmth, a promise, that made Elizabeth believe they would do just that. The day of the auction dawned clear and bright, a perfect Montana spring day. Jack had left before dawn with the trailer of heifers, heading for Billings. Elizabeth would follow later, once she had finished the last of the paperwork the bank required for their extension. As she was getting ready to leave, the phone rang. It was Mr. Coleman from the bank. "Mrs. Morgan." His voice was clipped, businesslike. "I'm calling about your extension request." Elizabeth braced herself. "Yes, Mr. Coleman. The committee has reviewed your case. Given the circumstances and the improvements we've observed, we're prepared to offer a 6-month extension, provided the auction proceeds meet the minimum threshold we discussed." Relief washed over her. "Thank you, Mr. Coleman. We won't disappoint you." "See that you don't," he replied. "Oh, and Mrs. Morgan, that ranch manager of yours. He seems to know what he's doing. You'd be wise to keep him around." Before she could respond, Coleman had hung up. Elizabeth stood for a moment, the phone still in her hand, a smile spreading across her face. 6 months. They had 6 months to turn things around. The drive to Billings took longer than expected. A spring shower had made the dirt roads slick, and Elizabeth drove carefully, one hand occasionally resting on her belly as the baby kicked vigorously. As if sensing her excitement, by the time she arrived at the auction grounds, the event was well underway. She made her way through the crowds, searching for Jack amidst the sea of cowboy hats and western shirts. She found him near the holding pens, deep in conversation with a group of serious-looking men in expensive boots. "Finest bloodlines in the state," Jack was saying. "Consistent weight gain, easy calving, excellent temperament." Thomas Morgan spent 15 years perfecting this herd. One of the men, older with silver hair and a bearing that screamed money, nodded thoughtfully. "I knew Thomas. Good rancher. Shame about what happened." Jack caught sight of Elizabeth approaching and straightened. "Gentlemen, allow me to introduce Elizabeth Morgan, the ranch owner." The men turned, their expressions shifting subtly as they took in her pregnant state. Elizabeth was used to it by now, the mixture of pity and assessment, as if her grief and her condition somehow diminished her capabilities. "Mrs. Morgan." The silver-haired man stepped forward, extending his hand. "Walter Kingsley. I did business with your husband a few times. He was a fine judge of cattle." Elizabeth shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, Mr. Kingsley. I understand you're interested in our heifers." Kingsley nodded. "If they're half as good as your man here claims, they'd be a valuable addition to my operation up in Helena." "They're better," Elizabeth replied, with a confidence that surprised even her. "But don't take our word for it. The proof is in the production records." She handed him a folder containing the detailed documentation she had prepared. Kingsley raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting such thorough information. He flipped through the pages, his expression growing increasingly interested. "Very impressive, Mrs. Morgan." Very impressive indeed. As the auction began, Elizabeth found herself standing shoulder to shoulder with Jack, watching as their carefully selected heifers were led into the ring one by one. The auctioneer's rapid-fire cadence washed over her as the bids climbed steadily higher. Kingsley was aggressive in his bidding, as were several other ranchers who had spoken with Jack earlier. By the time their last animal left the ring, Elizabeth's heart was pounding with a mixture of disbelief and elation. "Jack," she whispered, clutching his arm. "Did we just—" "Yeah," he confirmed, a rare, full smile breaking across his face. "We did. Exceeded the reserve price on every single one. Elizabeth felt lightheaded with relief. The bank will get their payment with enough left over to keep the ranch running through summer. Jack finished. You did it, Elizabeth. We did it, she corrected, impulsively wrapping her arms around him in a hug. Jack stiffened for a moment in surprise. Then his arms came around her, careful of her belly, but solid and warm. We did it, he agreed softly. The moment was interrupted by a sharp pain that made Elizabeth gasp and pull away. Jack's expression immediately shifted to concern. Elizabeth? What's wrong? She shook her head, pressing a hand to her side where the baby had kicked with unusual force. Nothing. Just the baby. He or she seems to be celebrating too. Jack's face relaxed, but there was something in his eyes, a longing, quickly masked, that made Elizabeth's heart skip. Before she could analyze it, Kingsley approached them, hand extended. Mrs. Morgan, Mr. Hayes, I'd like to discuss the possibility of future business. Those heifers were exactly what I've been looking for, and if you have more coming with those bloodlines, I want first option. The drive back to the ranch was quiet, both of them tired, but content with the day's success. Elizabeth watched the familiar landscape roll by, the setting sun casting long shadows across the fields. For the first time in months, the sight of the Morgan ranch filled her not with dread, but with possibility. What happens now? She asked finally, breaking the comfortable silence. Jack glanced at her, then back at the road. Now we build on what we started. The bank's off our backs for 6 months. The calving season is almost here. By fall, we'll have another crop of prime stock to sell. And after that? Elizabeth pressed, not entirely sure what she was asking. Jack's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. That's up to you, Elizabeth. This is your ranch. Your life. As they pulled into the driveway, the familiar silhouette of the farmhouse against the twilight sky filled Elizabeth with an unexpected emotion. Not grief, not anxiety, but a sense of coming home. And sitting beside her, his profile strong and steady in the fading light, was a man who had helped make that possible. For the first time since Thomas's death, Elizabeth allowed herself to imagine a future, not just for the ranch, but for herself and her child. A future that might, just might, include the quiet cowboy who had appeared on her doorstep when she needed him most. The success at the auction marked a turning point for the Morgan ranch. As spring settled over the Montana Valley, the land seemed to shake off its dormancy, much like Elizabeth herself. The fields turned emerald green, dotted with wildflowers that swayed in the gentle breeze. The pregnant heifers grew heavy with their calves, promise of new life echoing Elizabeth's own changing body. With the bank payments secured for the next 6 months, a weight had lifted from Elizabeth's shoulders. For the first time since Thomas's death, she could breathe, could think, beyond mere survival. The ranch still faced challenges: equipment that needed replacing, fences that required mending, a reputation that needed rebuilding, but these no longer seemed insurmountable. And through it all, Jack remained. What had begun as a temporary arrangement had evolved into something more permanent, though neither of them had spoken of it directly. He had moved from the bunkhouse into the small cabin at the edge of the property, giving him more privacy while keeping him close enough to handle any middle-of-the-night emergencies with the herd. Calving season arrived with the force of nature's most powerful reminder of continuity. One early morning in late April, Elizabeth woke to the sound of Jack's truck starting up. She glanced at the clock, 4:30 a.m. Without thinking, she dressed quickly and made her way to the barn, her 7-month pregnant belly making her movements slower but no less determined. She found Jack in the calving pen, his attention focused on a struggling heifer. First-timer, he explained without looking up, somehow sensing Elizabeth's presence without seeing her. She's having a hard time. Elizabeth moved closer, her experienced eye assessing the situation. Growing up on her father's ranch before marrying Thomas, she was no stranger to the birthing process. The calf's positioned wrong? Jack nodded, rolling up his sleeves. Going to have to turn it. Would you mind? Holding her head? Of course. Elizabeth moved to the front of the heifer, speaking in low, soothing tones as she stroked the animal's face. The heifer's dark eyes, wild with fear and pain, gradually calmed under Elizabeth's gentle touch. For the next hour, they worked together in near silence, communicating with glances and nods as Jack carefully, patiently worked to reposition the calf. When the newborn finally slid into the world, in a rush of fluid and movement, both humans let out a breath of relief. The mother cow turned to her calf, beginning to lick it clean with maternal dedication. Jack sat back on his heels, exhaustion and satisfaction evident in his posture. "Beautiful little bull calf," he remarked, watching as the newborn struggled to stand on wobbly legs. Elizabeth smiled, one hand unconsciously resting on her own belly. "Strong, too. Look at him already trying to get up." Jack's gaze shifted to her, his expression softening. "You should be resting. The doctor said—" "The doctor said normal activity is fine," Elizabeth interrupted. "And this is normal for me, Jack. I grew up in barns and calving pens. Being here, it feels right." Something passed between them in that moment. An understanding, perhaps, or a recognition. They were not just employer and employee, not just two people thrown together by circumstance. They were partners in this endeavor, this rebuilding of what had been broken. "Coffee?" Jack suggested, getting to his feet and offering her a hand up. Elizabeth accepted his help, her body protesting after the prolonged crouch. "I'll put the pot on. You check the other heifers." By mid-morning, 2 more calves had joined the first, all healthy, all strong. Elizabeth watched from the kitchen window as Jack moved among the cattle with sure, gentle hands. There was something about seeing him work, the competence, the quiet confidence, that stirred feelings she wasn't ready to name. The phone's shrill ring pulled her from her thoughts. It was Rachel Matthews, the wife of Thomas's best friend Robert, calling to remind her of the baby shower planned for the weekend. "Everyone's so excited," Rachel gushed. "The whole town's coming, I swear. We've got enough casseroles lined up to feed an army." Elizabeth felt a flutter of anxiety. Since the auction, she'd been so focused on the ranch that she'd had little interaction with the townsfolk. "Rachel, I'm not sure." "No arguments," her friend cut in firmly. "You need this, Elizabeth. A chance to celebrate this baby. Thomas would have wanted it." At the mention of her late husband, Elizabeth's throat tightened. "I know," she managed. "It's just—" "Just nothing," Rachel said, her voice gentling. 2 o'clock, Saturday. And bring that handsome ranch hand of yours. Robert says he's doing wonders for the place." After hanging up, Elizabeth stood for a moment, hand still on the receiver. The baby shower was a reminder of the life growing inside her, the life that would arrive in less than 2 months. A life that would never know its father. When Jack came in for lunch, she told him about the shower, trying to keep her tone casual. "You don't have to come, of course. It's going to be mostly women fussing over baby clothes and telling labor horror stories." Jack took a bite of his sandwich, considering. "Do you want me to come?" The question caught her off guard. Did she? The thought of facing the town's well-meaning but often overwhelming sympathy was daunting. Having Jack there, solid, steady Jack, would make it easier. "Yes," she admitted. "But I understand if you'd rather not." Jack shrugged, his expression unreadable. "Then I'll be there." Saturday arrived with picture-perfect weather, as if even the Montana skies were celebrating the new life soon to join the community. Elizabeth dressed carefully in a flowing sundress that accommodated her growing belly while still making her feel somewhat attractive. It was the first time in months she'd cared about her appearance, and the realization was both surprising and welcome. Jack was waiting by his truck when she emerged from the house, and the look on his face, a flash of something like awe quickly masked, made her cheeks warm. "You look nice," he said simply, opening the passenger door for her. "So do you," she replied, noting he'd exchanged his usual work clothes for clean jeans and a pressed button-down shirt. His hair was still damp from the shower, and he'd trimmed his beard. The overall effect was distracting. The drive to town was filled with companionable silence, broken only by Jack's occasional comment about the passing landscape or Elizabeth's directions. As they approached the Matthews home, Elizabeth felt her anxiety return, her hand instinctively moving to her wedding ring, which she still wore. Jack noticed the gesture. "We don't have to stay long," he said quietly. "Just say the word, and I'll make an excuse to get you home." The simple offer of an escape route eased some of her tension. "Thank you." The Matthews yard was filled with cars, and the house overflowed with people, women from the church, neighbors from surrounding ranches, shopkeepers from town. As Elizabeth and Jack made their way up the walkway, a hush fell over the gathered guests, followed by an eruption of greetings and congratulations. Rachel rushed forward, embracing Elizabeth carefully around her belly. "You look wonderful," she exclaimed, then turned to Jack with an appraising smile. "And you must be the famous Mr. Hayes. We've heard so much about what you're doing for the Morgan Ranch." Jack shifted uncomfortably under the attention. "Just doing my job, ma'am." Robert Matthews appeared, shaking Jack's hand with genuine warmth. "More than a job, from what I hear. Elizabeth, he's got the old Miller place talking about switching to Morgan bloodlines. Thomas would be proud." At the mention of her husband, Elizabeth expected the familiar stab of grief. Instead, there was a gentle ache, tempered now by something like pride. Thomas had built something valuable, something that was surviving even without him. "He would be," she agreed softly. The afternoon progressed in a blur of activity, games she endured with good grace, gifts she opened with genuine gratitude, conversations that flowed more easily than she had expected. Throughout it all, Jack remained a steady presence at the periphery of the gathering. He didn't hover, but he was always there when she glanced around, his gaze meeting hers with silent understanding. It was during a momentary lull in the festivities that Elizabeth overheard a conversation not meant for her ears. She had stepped into the hallway for a moment of quiet when voices drifted from the kitchen. Rachel and another woman she recognized as Marge Wilkins, the postmistress and town gossip. "Living out there alone with him," Marge was saying, her voice low but clear. "You know people are talking." Rachel's response was defensive. "She's a widow, Marge. Jack Hayes is her employee. There's nothing improper about it." "A very handsome employee," Marge countered. "And the way he looks at her? Mark my words, there's more to that story than she's letting on. Thomas hasn't been gone 6 months. And she's already what?" Jack's voice, cold and controlled, cut through the gossip like a blade. Elizabeth froze, her heart hammering in her chest. "Mr. Hayes!" Marge's voice rose an octave in surprise. "I was just expressing concern for Elizabeth's reputation. A young widow, in her condition, living alone with a single man. Surely you understand how it might appear." "What I understand," Jack replied, his tone measured but with an underlying steel that Elizabeth had never heard before, "is that Elizabeth Morgan is working herself to the bone, trying to save her husband's legacy while preparing to raise their child alone. What I understand is that this community should be supporting her, not spreading rumors that would hurt her." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Rachel spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "He's right, Marge. We should be ashamed." Elizabeth backed away from the kitchen door, her thoughts in turmoil. Jack had defended her, had stood up to the town gossip without hesitation. But it was more than that. It was the conviction in his voice, the certainty that she was doing something worthy, something admirable. When Jack found her a few minutes later, she was sitting on the porch swing, watching the late afternoon sunlight filter through the budding trees. "Ready to go?" he asked, his expression giving no indication of the confrontation in the kitchen. Elizabeth nodded, suddenly exhausted. More than ready. The drive home was quiet, but Elizabeth's mind was racing. Finally, as they turned onto the long driveway to the ranch, she spoke. "I heard what you said to Marge." In the kitchen. Jack's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel, but his voice remained steady. "I'm sorry if I overstepped." "You didn't," she assured him quickly. Thank you for defending me." He glanced at her briefly before returning his attention to the road. "Nothing to defend. You're doing what needs to be done. Anyone who can't see that isn't worth worrying about." The simplicity of his statement, the absolute certainty in his voice, brought unexpected tears to Elizabeth's eyes. Since Thomas's death, she had been drowning in doubt, questioning her decisions, her abilities, her right to continue running the ranch. Jack's unwavering faith in her was like a lifeline thrown to a swimmer struggling against the current. As the truck pulled up to the house, Elizabeth made a decision. "Would you come in for dinner? Not as my employee, as my friend." Jack turned off the engine, the silence suddenly thick between them. "Are you sure that's wise, given what Marge was saying?" Elizabeth met his gaze directly. "I've spent the last 5 months letting fear dictate my choices, Jack. Fear of failure, fear of the future, fear of what others might think. I'm tired of being afraid." A slow smile spread across Jack's face, transforming his usually serious expression. "In that case, I'd be honored, friend." That night marked a shift in their relationship. The invisible barrier that had kept them in their defined roles, employer and employee, widow and hired hand, began to dissolve. They still worked side by side during the days, Jack handling the physical demands of the ranch while Elizabeth managed the business aspects. But their evenings took on a new dimension. Sometimes they would sit on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Other times they would linger at the kitchen table, talking about everything and nothing. Books they had read, places they had seen, dreams they had harbored. Jack told her about growing up in Wyoming, the youngest of 4 boys, always trying to prove himself. About his time in the rodeo circuit, chasing glory and finding only broken bones and empty pockets. About the years working various ranches, learning the trade from the ground up, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots. Elizabeth shared stories of her childhood on her father's small cattle operation in eastern Montana, of her college years studying business with dreams of returning to modernize the family ranch, only to have those dreams cut short when her parents sold the property and retired to Arizona. She told him about meeting Thomas at a livestock auction, his charm and vision for the Morgan Ranch sweeping her off her feet. "He was larger than life," she said one evening, a wistful smile playing at her lips. "Everything was always big with Thomas. Big dreams, big risks. When he believed in something, there was no halfway." Jack nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That kind of passion is rare, special, and exhausting," Elizabeth added with a small laugh. "Sometimes I just wanted stability, you know? A moment to catch our breath before the next big idea, the next expansion, the next risk." She paused, guilt coloring her words. "Maybe if I had supported him more, believed in his vision the way he did." "Stop," Jack interrupted gently. "Thomas made his choices. From everything you've told me, he wouldn't want you blaming yourself for any of it." Elizabeth sighed, her hand moving to her belly where the baby kicked energetically. "You're right. It's just, I want to honor his memory, his dreams for this place. But I also need to find my own way forward." Jack's gaze was steady, compassionate. "Those things don't have to be in conflict, Elizabeth. Honoring what Thomas built doesn't mean you can't build something of your own on that foundation." His words settled in her heart, easing a tension she hadn't fully acknowledged. Thomas would always be a part of her life, a part of this ranch. But perhaps there was room for new dreams alongside the legacy he had left. As May gave way to June, the ranch flourished under their combined efforts. The calves grew strong, the fields yielded a promising first cutting of hay, and word spread through the ranching community about the Morgan bloodlines being, quote, back in the game. Elizabeth's due date approached with both excitement and trepidation. The nursery was ready, painted a soft yellow with furniture Jack had refurbished from pieces found in the attic. Rachel and other women from town had organized a schedule of helpers for the first few weeks after the birth. Everything was prepared, except perhaps Elizabeth herself. One night, unable to find a comfortable position for her now enormous belly, she made her way to the kitchen for a glass of water. To her surprise, a light was on in the barn. Curious, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and waddled across the yard. She found Jack working on a piece of wood, his hands skillfully guiding a carving knife across the surface. Shavings littered the workbench around him and the scent of fresh-cut pine filled the air. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, announcing her presence. Jack looked up, momentarily startled, then smiled. "Had an idea I wanted to finish." He hesitated, then turned the wood to show her what he had been creating. A small, intricately carved mobile of woodland animals. A deer, a bear, a rabbit, a fox. Elizabeth's breath caught. "Jack, it's beautiful." He shrugged, a hint of color rising in his tanned cheeks. "My grandfather taught me. Thought the baby might like something handmade for the crib." The simple gesture, this tough, practical cowboy creating something so delicate and whimsical for her child, brought tears to her eyes. Pregnancy hormones, she told herself, even as she recognized the emotion ran deeper than that. "Thank you," she whispered. "It's perfect." Jack set the carving down, his expression turning serious. "Elizabeth, there's something I've been meaning to ask you." Her heart skipped a beat. "Yes?" "After the baby comes and you're settled, what do you want to happen with the ranch? With me?" The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken implications. Elizabeth had been avoiding thinking about this very issue, pushing it aside in favor of more immediate concerns. But now, facing Jack's direct gaze, she couldn't evade it any longer. "I don't know," she admitted. "When you first came, I was just trying to survive. I couldn't see past the next bill, the next crisis. But now—" "Now?" Jack prompted when she trailed off. "Now I can see a future for this place. A good one." Elizabeth moved closer, suddenly needing him to understand what she was struggling to articulate. "You've become essential to that future, Jack. Not just as a ranch manager, but as someone I've come to rely on, to trust, to—" She stopped, uncertain how to continue without saying more than she was ready to. Jack stood, closing the distance between them until they were just inches apart. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice low and intense, "I need you to know something. I didn't come here just because of my promise to Thomas or the job he hired me for." Elizabeth's breath caught. "Then why did you come?" "Because he talked about you in a way that made me curious. Because when he described this place, I could see it in my mind. Because something told me this was where I needed to be." Jack's hand rose, hesitating just shy of touching her face. "I didn't expect. I never thought." A sharp pain interrupted the moment, making Elizabeth gasp and clutch her belly. Jack's expression immediately shifted to concern. "Elizabeth? What is it?" She tried to smile through the discomfort. "Nothing. Just Braxton Hicks. The doctor said they might." Another pain, stronger this time, cut off her words. "Or maybe not Braxton Hicks." Jack's face paled slightly, but his voice remained calm. "How far apart?" "I don't know, I just—" A rush of fluid suddenly soaked her nightgown and slippers. "Oh, I think my water just broke." For a split second, Jack froze. Then, training and instinct took over. Okay, let's get you to the hospital. Can you walk to the truck?" Elizabeth nodded, clinging to his arm as another contraction gripped her. "The bag in the closet. I'll get it. Let's get you to the truck first." The drive to the regional hospital in Billings was a blur of increasing pain, and Jack's steady voice coaching her through each contraction. By the time they arrived, the contractions were coming fast and hard. Elizabeth's grip on Jack's hand white-knuckled as he helped her through the emergency entrance. "My wife's in labor," he told the nurse at the desk, the lie slipping out easily in the urgency of the moment. "Her water broke about an hour ago." Elizabeth was too focused on breathing through the pain to correct him, and soon she was being wheeled into the maternity ward, Jack trotting alongside until they reached a set of double doors. "Sir, you'll need to wait here," a nurse told him firmly. "Are you the father?" Jack hesitated, his eyes meeting Elizabeth's. In that moment, something passed between them. A question, a possibility, a future neither had dared to articulate. "No," he said finally. "No, I'm not. But I—" "Jack," Elizabeth gasped through another contraction. "Don't leave, please." The nurse's expression softened. "Are you family?" Jack straightened, his decision made. "Yes," he said with quiet certainty. "Yes, I am." As they wheeled her through the doors, Elizabeth caught one last glimpse of Jack's face, determined, concerned, and filled with something that looked remarkably like love. 7 hours of labor later, Elizabeth Morgan brought her daughter into the world with a final, powerful push, and a cry that transformed into laughter when she heard her baby's first wail. The sound, strong, indignant, alive, filled the delivery room with its simple, profound declaration, "I am here." "It's a girl," the doctor announced, placing the squirming, red-faced infant on Elizabeth's chest. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Elizabeth gazed down at her daughter through tears of exhaustion and wonder. 10 tiny fingers, 10 perfect toes, a shock of dark hair so like Thomas's that it made her heart catch. "Hello," she whispered, touching a fingertip to the baby's cheek. "I've been waiting for you." The nurse smiled, efficiently cleaning and checking the newborn while allowing this crucial bonding time. "Does she have a name?" Elizabeth nodded, the decision she'd been contemplating for months suddenly crystal clear. "Hope. Her name is Hope Morgan." Hope! The word that had sustained her through grief and uncertainty, the feeling that had slowly, steadily returned to her life with each passing day at the ranch, with each small victory, with each moment spent in Jack's steadying presence. "That's perfect," the nurse approved. "Now, there's someone in the waiting room who's been pacing a hole in our floor for the past 7 hours. Should I send him in?" Elizabeth nodded, suddenly nervous. She was acutely aware of her disheveled appearance, of the vulnerability of this moment. But when Jack appeared in the doorway, his usual composure replaced by barely contained emotion, none of that mattered. "Elizabeth," he breathed, his gaze moving from her face to the bundle in her arms. "Is she—" "She's perfect," Elizabeth confirmed, shifting slightly so he could see the baby's face. "Come meet Hope." Jack approached the bed with the careful reverence of someone entering sacred space. His weathered hands, so capable with horses and machinery, hung awkwardly at his sides, as if he didn't trust himself to touch something so delicate. "Would you like to hold her?" Elizabeth asked. Jack's eyes widened. "I don't know how." "Just support her head and neck," the nurse interjected, already lifting the swaddled infant. Before Jack could protest, Hope was in his arms, and the transformation on his face was something Elizabeth knew she would remember for the rest of her life. The tough, stoic cowboy melted, his expression softening into awe as he gazed down at the tiny life in his arms. "Hello, little lady," he whispered. "Welcome to the world." Hope squirmed, her face scrunching momentarily before relaxing into sleep, apparently content in this stranger's embrace. Jack looked up at Elizabeth, and in his eyes she saw a question, a hope, a possibility that both thrilled and terrified her. "She's beautiful," he said simply. "Just like her mother." The nurse, sensing the moment between them, quietly excused herself, leaving them in a bubble of privacy within the clinical setting. "Jack," Elizabeth began, not sure what she wanted to say but feeling that something needed to be acknowledged. "When they asked if you were family—" "I know I'm not," he interrupted gently. "I shouldn't have." "No," Elizabeth cut him off. "That's not what I was going to say. I was going to thank you. For being here. For everything." Jack carefully returned Hope to her arms, his fingers brushing Elizabeth's in the exchange. "There's nowhere else I would have been, Elizabeth." The weight of his words, the sincerity in his voice, settled over her like a blanket. There would be time later for deeper conversations, for defining whatever was growing between them. For now, this simple truth was enough. 3 days later, Elizabeth and Hope were cleared to return home. As Jack's truck turned onto the familiar driveway of the Morgan Ranch, Elizabeth felt a surge of emotion. Last time she had left this place, she had been a pregnant widow drowning in uncertainty. Now she returned as a mother, with a clarity of purpose that both humbled and strengthened her. "Welcome home, Hope," she whispered, to the sleeping infant in the car seat beside her. "This is your legacy." Jack glanced over, a half-smile playing at his lips. "She's got quite a birthright, the Morgan bloodlines, the best grazing land in the county, and the strongest mother I've ever met." Elizabeth blushed at the compliment, and a pretty decent ranch manager thrown into the bargain. The homecoming Elizabeth had imagined, quiet, just the 3 of them settling into a new routine, was not to be. As they pulled up to the house, she was stunned to see several trucks and cars parked in the yard and a banner strung across the porch reading, "Welcome home, Hope." "Jack?" she questioned, turning to him with surprise. He shrugged, looking slightly abashed. Rachel might have called while you were in the shower at the hospital, and she might have organized a little something. A little something? Elizabeth laughed, gesturing at the gathered crowd emerging from the house. The whole town is here. Jack's expression turned serious. Is that okay? I can ask them to leave if you're too tired. The offer touched her, his first concern, as always, for her well-being. No, it's wonderful, actually. Thank you. The next few hours passed in a blur of well-wishes, casseroles being arranged in the refrigerator, and hope being passed from one admiring set of arms to another. Even Marge Wilkins, the gossipy postmistress, seemed genuinely delighted with the baby, cooing over her Morgan eyes and declaring her the prettiest newborn the county had seen in a decade. Elizabeth observed it all with a sense of grateful disbelief. These people, neighbors, acquaintances, even those who had whispered about her situation, had come together to welcome her daughter, to support her. The community she had felt so isolated from was embracing her in hope without reservation. Through it all, Jack moved quietly in the background, making sure Elizabeth had water and food, taking Hope when she needed a moment to rest, fielding questions about the ranch so Elizabeth wouldn't be overwhelmed. He was a shadow of support, present without imposing, helpful without hovering. As the afternoon wore on and visitors began to depart, Elizabeth found herself on the porch with Rachel, watching as Jack showed Robert and some of the other men the new calves in the north pasture. He's a good man, Rachel observed, following Elizabeth's gaze, the way he looks at you in hope. Elizabeth sighed, too tired to pretend she didn't understand. It's complicated, Rachel. Her friend arched an eyebrow. Is it? Seems pretty simple from where I'm standing. He cares for you. You care for him. And that little girl deserves all the love this world can give her. Thomas has only been gone 8 months, Elizabeth protested weakly. Rachel's expression softened. And he would be the first one to tell you that life is too short to waste a single moment of happiness. You know that as well as I do. Before Elizabeth could respond, Hope began to fuss in her bassinet nearby, her tiny face scrunching in preparation for a full-fledged cry. Elizabeth moved to pick her up, but Rachel was faster. I've got her, her friend assured her. You look dead on your feet. Go get some rest while you have a house full of helpers. Too exhausted to argue, Elizabeth retreated to her bedroom, collapsing onto the bed, fully clothed. She intended to just close her eyes for a moment, but the next thing she knew, the room was bathed in the golden light of sunset, and Hope's crying had quieted. Curious, she made her way down the hallway to the nursery, stopping in the doorway at the sight before her. Jack sat in the rocking chair, Hope cradled in one arm while he read softly from a worn copy of The Velveteen Rabbit. His deep voice was gentle, mesmerizing, as he recited the familiar words about what it means to become real. It doesn't happen all at once, said the skin horse. You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily, or have sharp edges, or who have to be carefully kept. Elizabeth leaned against the doorframe, unwilling to interrupt this perfect moment. Jack continued reading, unaware of her presence, his weathered hand looking impossibly large against Hope's tiny form. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand. He paused, looking down at the now sleeping infant. Your mama understands, little one, he whispered. She knows all about being real. Elizabeth's heart swelled with an emotion so powerful it nearly brought her to her knees. This man, this strong, gentle, steadfast man, had carved a place in her life, in her heart, without her even realizing it was happening. So do you, she said softly, finally making her presence known. Jack looked up, surprise and something like embarrassment crossing his features. I didn't mean to overstep. She was crying, and Rachel said you were sleeping, so I thought. You didn't overstep, Elizabeth interrupted, moving into the room to stand beside the rocking chair. You were exactly what she needed. What we both need. She added silently. The days that followed settled into a rhythm of newborn care and ranch work. Jack took on even more responsibility with the cattle and fields, allowing Elizabeth to focus on recovering and bonding with Hope. Yet despite his increased workload, he always found time to stop by the house several times a day, bringing lunch, fixing a squeaky door, or simply sitting with Elizabeth while she nursed, talking quietly about the day's events. One evening, about 2 weeks after Hope's birth, Elizabeth sat on the porch swing, the baby sleeping against her shoulder in the warm summer twilight. Jack joined her, his day's work evident in the dirt on his jeans and the tiredness around his eyes. "Kingsley called today," he said, settling beside her on the swing. "He wants first option on the fall calves. Says the ones he bought from us in spring are outperforming everything else in his herd." Elizabeth smiled with pride. Thomas would be pleased. He worked so hard on those bloodlines. Jack nodded, his gaze on the distant mountains turning purple in the fading light. "He built something special here." "We're preserving it," Elizabeth said softly, "making it stronger." The "we" hung between them, neither acknowledging its significance directly. Instead, they sat in companionable silence as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "I've been thinking," Jack said finally. "The eastern pasture needs rotation. If we move the herd there next week, it would give the north section time to recover before winter." Elizabeth nodded. The practicality of ranch management, a comfortable topic. "That makes sense. And we should think about how many heifers to hold back for breeding. If Kingsley's results are any indication, we could start expanding the herd next year." "Next year," Jack repeated, a question in his voice. Elizabeth turned to look at him directly. "I'm not going anywhere, Jack. This is Hope's home, her birthright. And she paused, gathering courage. "I can't imagine running it without you." Jack's expression remained carefully neutral. "As your ranch manager." "As whatever you want to be," Elizabeth whispered, her heart pounding. The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility. Then Hope stirred, breaking the tension with a small whimper that quickly escalated to a hungry cry. "I should get her inside," Elizabeth said, rising from the swing. Jack stood too, his hand briefly touching her arm. "Elizabeth, we should talk about—" "I know," she interrupted gently. "And we will. But not tonight. Tonight I'm too tired to think clearly about anything beyond the next feeding." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Tomorrow, then. I'll bring dinner." As Elizabeth settled into the rocking chair to nurse Hope, her mind swirled with conflicting emotions. What was she doing opening this door with Jack? Was it too soon after Thomas? What would people say? But beneath these surface concerns lay a deeper truth. Jack Hayes had become essential to her life, not just as a ranch manager, but as a partner, a friend, a support she hadn't known she needed. And there was hope to consider. Her daughter deserved every ounce of love and security this world could offer. The way Jack looked at the baby, the tenderness in his strong hands when he held her, it was clear he already cared deeply for Hope. Could Elizabeth deny her daughter a chance at having that kind of male presence in her life? Thomas's face rose in her mind, not as he had been in those final difficult months, but as he was when they first met. Vibrant, full of dreams and passion. What would he want for her and Hope? "I wish you could tell me what to do," she whispered to the memory of her husband. But deep in her heart, she already knew. Thomas had lived fully, loved completely, and taken risks for the things he believed in. He wouldn't want her to close herself off from happiness out of some misplaced sense of loyalty to his memory. The next evening, Jack arrived as promised, carrying a basket that smelled deliciously of Rachel Matthews' famous fried chicken. They ate on the porch, the summer air warm and fragrant with wildflowers, Hope sleeping peacefully in her bassinet nearby. As they finished their meal, the moment Elizabeth had both anticipated and dreaded arrived, the conversation they had postponed the night before. "Elizabeth," Jack began, his usual confidence tempered with uncertainty. "What I wanted to say yesterday—" "Wait," she interrupted, needing to speak first, to clarify her own thoughts before hearing his. "Before you say anything, I need you to understand something. When Thomas died, I thought my life was over. Not just because I loved him, but because I couldn't imagine a future without the plans we had made together. Everything seemed impossible." Jack nodded, listening intently. "Then you came," she continued, "and gradually the impossible started to seem possible again. The ranch, the future, Even, she hesitated, even happiness. You gave me that, Jack. You and your stubborn belief that things could be good again. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to maintain eye contact despite the vulnerability of the moment. I'm not ready to define what this is between us. It's too soon and there's too much at stake. The ranch, hope, our working relationship. But I do know that I want you in our lives. Not just as an employee, as something more. Jack was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. When I came here, I was just honoring a promise. A job. I never expected. He gestured between them. This. Whatever this is. He shifted closer on the porch swing, his calloused hand tentatively covering hers. I'm not asking for definitions or promises, Elizabeth. All I know is that being here with you and Hope feels right in a way nothing else ever has. I want to see where it leads if you'll let me. The simplicity of his statement, the lack of pressure or expectation, eased something in Elizabeth's chest. This wasn't a decision that had to be made all at once. It was a door being opened, a possibility being acknowledged, a path they could explore together at their own pace. I'd like that, she whispered, turning her hand to intertwine her fingers with his. They sat in comfortable silence as twilight deepened into night. The weight of unspoken feelings between them no longer a barrier, but a bridge to something new. As summer gave way to fall, the ranch thrived under their combined care. The calves grew strong, the hay was harvested and stored for winter, and the bank's loan officer expressed increasing confidence in the operation's viability. But it was within the walls of the farmhouse that the most significant growth occurred. Jack remained in the cabin, maintaining a respectful distance that the community could accept without gossip. But he took his meals at the main house, spent his evenings helping with Hope, and gradually items of his began to appear. A book on the coffee table, work gloves by the door, a jacket hanging on the peg that had once held Thomas's. Hope flourished, her personality emerging day by day, Thomas's determination in the set of her tiny jaw, Elizabeth's thoughtfulness in her observant eyes. And something else, something uniquely her own, a joyfulness, a readiness to smile that seemed to light the house from within. It was this smile that finally broke through the last of Jack's reserves. One evening in late September, as he was reading to Hope, a ritual that had become as essential to him as it was to her, the 2-month-old infant looked up at him and smiled, a real responsive smile that crinkled her eyes and showed her gums. "Elizabeth," he called, his voice urgent. "Elizabeth, come quick." She rushed in from the kitchen, alarmed. "What is it? What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Jack assured her, his face alight with wonder. She smiled at me. A real smile. Elizabeth laughed, relief and joy mingling as she knelt beside the rocking chair. "Of course she did. She adores you." The words slipped out naturally. A simple truth they both knew but hadn't acknowledged. Jack's gaze moved from Hope to Elizabeth, and in his eyes she saw everything he hadn't yet found the words to say. "Elizabeth," he began, his voice low and serious. "I need to tell you something." She nodded, suddenly certain of what was coming and equally certain of her response. "I'm in love with you," he said simply, "and with Hope. I think I have been since that first calving. When you showed up at 4:30 in the morning, 7 months pregnant, ready to help bring new life into the world. You were the strongest, most beautiful thing I'd ever seen." Elizabeth's breath caught, emotions flooding through her, surprise, joy, and a deep sense of rightness. "Jack, you don't have to say anything," he assured her quickly. "I know it's complicated. I know Thomas will always be part of your life, part of Hope's life. As he should be. I'm not trying to replace him. I needed you to know." Elizabeth rose from her kneeling position and gently took Hope from his arms, placing the now drowsy infant in her crib. Then she returned to Jack, who had stood and was watching her with an expression of mingled hope and uncertainty. "Thomas was my first love," she said softly, taking his hands in hers. "He gave me this ranch, gave me hope, gave me a chapter of my life I'll always cherish. But that chapter ended, Jack. Not by choice, but it ended." She stepped closer, her heart pounding but her mind clearer than it had been in months. What's between us? It's not a replacement or a continuation. It's something new. Something I wasn't looking for, but am so grateful to have found. Jack's hands tightened around hers, his eyes never leaving her face. What are you saying, Elizabeth? I'm saying that I love you too, she whispered, and that I want you to stay. Not as my employee, not as my friend, as my partner. As Hope's, she hesitated, then continued with certainty. As Hope's father, if you want to be. The impact of her words was visible in every line of Jack's body, a tension releasing, a hope confirmed, a future suddenly within reach. Are you sure? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. People will talk. They'll say it's too soon. Elizabeth smiled, a certainty settling over her like a mantle. Let them talk. We know what this is. We know it's real. Jack pulled her into his arms then, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. When he kissed her, it wasn't the passionate collision of new lovers, but the gentle, profound connection of two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. Stay, Elizabeth whispered against his lips. Stay, and we'll raise her together. And in that moment, in the quiet nursery with Hope sleeping peacefully beside them, Elizabeth knew that what had begun as an arrangement born of necessity had transformed into something beautiful and enduring. The loss that had nearly broken her had led, through twists and turns and healing, to a love she hadn't known was possible. Thomas would always be part of their story, the foundation upon which this new chapter was built. But as she stood in Jack's embrace, her daughter sleeping nearby, Elizabeth Morgan looked toward the future with a heart full of hope and a soul at peace. Life had taken an unexpected turn, but it had led her exactly where she needed to be. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.